The one-year anniversary of GDPR is upon us. So what does it mean for businesses, and what about future legislation? Danny Palmer with ZDNet has some answers for us. So Danny, just start with where we are now, 12 months into this.
So it's been a year since GDPR came into force across the European Union and the world as a whole, because even though this new legislation, or as it was new a year ago, the General Data Protection Regulation was designed for European countries, it's had an impact all over the globe. At its core, the legislation is designed to help bring sort of legislation into the modern age to reflect the modern digital internet connected world, with everything being sort of so online now. The laws hadn't caught up. One of the things it's supposed to do is give the individual consumer, your individual internet user, more say over how their information is used online. One of the ways which this was really demonstrated in the run-up to GDPR coming into force was when internet users across Europe, even the world, received or even inundated with emails from various services they signed up to or registered with, or in some cases hadn't even registered with over the years, asking them to remain on their mailing list by giving consent to be so. For example, say you made a purchase at an online store in 2014. That online store would have kept your email address, contact details, perhaps other data on record. When the GDPR was coming into force, they had to do some work to make sure that you still consented to that. If you still consented to them having your information and being on that mailing list, you just clicked yes, no, or in some cases took no action to say, okay, I consent to this. On the other hand, if you didn't want to be on that mailing list, you were given the option to unsubscribe. And a lot of people found that when in the run-up to GDPR, it was kind of a big cleanup operation for them in terms of getting off mailing lists they didn't know existed or had been on and didn't want to be a part of anymore. For me personally, I remember one of the emails I got saying, do you want to still be on this mailing list, was from a message board I first signed up to when I was a teenager. So we're talking at least 15 years. So they've been keeping that data for 15 years. And now, at least finally, I had the option of going, hey, I don't want you to keep that anymore. It's please take me off. So that's just one of the things that GDPR is supposed to do, give individuals a bit more freedom over their information on the web. A second area where it is having impact is on when it comes to data compliance, or how organizations use the data they have on you. Because you can consent to saying, I want this data to be used in this way, but then it's up to the organization or the data processor, as they're called in these circumstances, to ensure they're using that information in a correct and, I suppose, wholesome way. For example, a big example of how data was being misused occurred in the run-up to GDPR with the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal. Facebook users had no idea that their information was being used in such a way. There was no information in the terms and conditions that said, this is how this data is being used. Now, if the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal had been an event which had taken place after May 25th last year, it would have been eligible to come under another big element of GDPR, which is fines for non-compliance. With these, the organizations, if they are found to be not compliant in terms of how they handle data, be that because they were misusing it or exploiting it, or they suffered a data breach and were found to have taken no measures to try and protect that data, or even try to cover it up, they could be fined potentially 4% of their global annual turnover, which for your bigger organizations like Facebook would be an awful lot of money. In the Cambridge Analytica case, they only got fined £500,000 because it was brought to light before GDPR came into force. The first major fine with GDPR came in January this year, where the French data protection watchdog fined Google 50 million euros for not being transparent with how they were using advertising data. Google have appealed that fine, but it still marks quite a significant case because it's the first time a big organization the size of Google has been issued with a fine. Some would argue that 50 million for a company like Google is pocket change, really. But I suppose one thing that data protection watchdogs don't want to do is they don't want to sort of just be excitedly pushing, oh hey, let's give 4% fine, because I suppose they're saving that for the big stuff, as it were. And while there's no indication as to what is going to be receiving the bigger fines, various data protection watchdogs like the ICO here in the UK have indicated that there are plenty of investigations going on into data misuse, which opened up after May 25th last year, which could result in some big fines. We'll just have to wait and see what happens next with that. Although there are some who, while not advocating the use of massive fines for no reason, some are suggesting that we need a big fine at some point sooner rather than later to show that GDPR is a force to be reckoned with, because as it stands, there's been no big fine, and some legal professionals think that some organizations might think it's all a bit of a damp squib, but that could change if a big fine comes into force.
Yeah, good question, Danny. So what about similar legislation in other countries, specifically the U.S.?
Although some of these US-based publications might find they need to really start working towards complying with data protection legislation sooner rather than later, because California has become the first US state to implement its own privacy legislation, which comes into force on January the 1st next year. It's taken a lot of cues from GDPR, although there's no rules for there's no fines, there's no mandatory period for data reporting if you've had a breach. But California is one region in the world which is looking to follow in the footsteps of GDPR. Other countries like Japan, Brazil, South Korea, and India are also all looking at their own versions of it. So some are still skeptical about GDPR, but it looks as if it is becoming the future of privacy and data protection legislation, as more bodies around the world look to implement their own GDPR-style laws.
All right, Danny, thank you. For more on the anniversary of GDPR, including what Microsoft had to say about potential legislation in the U.S., be sure you check out Tech Republic and ZDNet.